to be a badass BA. We are excited to share with you a topic that we feel is critical in the success of a CE system or implementation. Today, Shelby and I will be sharing our knowledge over the next 40 minutes. My name is Melissa Erickson, and I am a team manager for Stoneridge Software, and I have been for the last 3 years. I have been working with D365 CE or CRM for the past 14 years with a mix of consulting and end user experience. My passion has always lied in understanding a business process and determining the best solution, so this is a topic near and dear to my heart.
Hi, my name is Shelby Spillar. I'm a functional consultant and BA for Stoneridge Software. I've been working in the functional consulting space for the past 8 years, during which I've worked with both NAV, VC, and CE. For the past 2 or so years, my role has expanded to include business analysts, and I've just loved the process and satisfaction that can come from helping a customer in that capacity. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about how to be a badass BA.
So reminder, we will have Q&A at the end. So Shelby and I are going to go through our topics today. I'm going to talk about our agenda first. We are going to be covering what is a BA and why are they important? What does a BA do and why is the role necessary? We will cover some tools to help do the job of a BA more efficiently. We will highlight the top 3 superpowers of a BA and how to get to superpower status. And lastly, and most important, we will talk about how to get to creating badass requirements. So let's get started. I'm going to kick off with some stats to really help set the stage for our topic today and why it's so important. While researching, we found some interesting data from the Harvard Business Review around how many IT projects fail, become out of control, or cost more money than budgeted. We have a quote here: "It will be no surprise if a large established company fails in the coming years because of an out of control IT project." Harvard Business Review found this to be true after conducting the largest global study ever of IT change initiatives. They examined 1,471 projects, comparing their budgets and estimated performance benefits with the actual cost and results. What they found was the average project cost overrun is 27%. Only 64% of projects meet their goals. 70% of companies report having at least one failed project in the last year. Organizations lose $109 million for every billion invested in projects and programs. High-performing organizations successfully complete 89% of projects, while low performers only complete 36% successfully, and low performers waste nearly 12 times more resources than high-performing organizations. And the most shocking of all, only 1/3 of companies always prepare a business case for new projects. You may be wondering what this has to do with being a badass BA. Project cost above budget, projects not meeting their goals, and failed projects are all a direct reflection of what we would consider the BA role in that upfront discovery process. Oftentimes, people want to get building or they think they already know what to build, so they skip or minimize this process. But doing this process right and well, really taking the time to figure out the scope, plan out that project, will be a direct correlation to the success in staying on budget. Oftentimes, people think that doing this upfront process takes more time and therefore costs money, but I've seen many times where you waste even more time or money not doing it at all or well. So what is a BA and how does it help businesses become high performing and not make the mistakes of the companies on the previous slide? A business analyst, known as a BA, is defined as a person who analyzes and documents processes or systems of businesses. The typical role focuses on defining business requirements. Different organizations use BAs for different projects. The roles can vary slightly. Today, we will focus on a BA in reference to implementing Dynamics 365 CE projects and the importance they play in those projects. Simply put, a BA's main role is to manage the solution scope. They take the lead in handling all aspects of the solution scope and act as a facilitator, communicator, and problem solver for the given project. BAs focus on eliciting requirements, analyzing those requirements, and planning all the activities while monitoring and controlling the solution scope. They also help validate requirements during user acceptance testing and ultimately meet client outcomes and expectations with those requirements. Their ultimate goal is truly understand the business's processes and help define all the specific requirements that make up those processes. BAs are really focused on achieving return on investment, or ROI. Value over cost is critical in the success of a project. Really understanding your success criteria and goals you are trying to achieve will help drive if the value outweighs the cost. 5 ways they can increase total value are prioritizing requirements, discovering new business needs and recommending improved processes to fit those needs, increasing communication between stakeholders, specifically business and IT, providing a framework for the team to scale, and lastly, supporting user adoption initiatives. The biggest value add is preparing for the future by discovering new business needs and providing a framework to scale. Every organization wants to do that, but they also know they need user adoption for the project and implementation to ultimately be successful. So focusing on that will also provide a foundation for growth. 5 ways they can decrease the total cost is by documenting the right requirements and doing it well, which we will cover in a bit with Shelby, reduction and rework, and then also shortening the project length by having a clear picture of scope, reduction in stakeholder wasted time, reviewing that scope, of course, and determining most cost-effective solutions throughout that project. What stakeholders are going to care most about is the shortened project length. Once work has been decided on, people always want it as soon as possible. So being able to shorten the length plus reduce stakeholder time so they can focus on other priorities in their organization are going to be clear value adds and will make up that ROI over and over again. Besides making sure the value outweighs the cost, a BA is focused on reducing the cone of uncertainty. They do this by firming up requirements, goals, and success criteria to ultimately get to a defined scope. The more defined scope, the lower the cone of uncertainty is, and therefore the less likely your project will go outside of scope, over budget, and stay on the timeline. Organizations use the cone of uncertainty to be really clear on the needs and objectives and share those needs and objectives organization-wide, which ultimately lowers the risk once you get into building and executing the project. Everyone is on the same page about what is in scope, what the goals are, and what specific requirements are being met. I'll kick it over to Shelby to talk a bit about their roles and some toolkits next.
Thanks, Melissa. So now that we know what a BA is and why they're important, let's talk about their specific role in a project. A BA is essentially the hub, wheel, and spoke of any successful project. They are the main source of client knowledge and responsible for knowing all the ins and outs of the client's business. They act as the liaison between all of these other players that you see on the screen: the tech consultant, functional consultant, solution architect, engagement manager, project manager, and the client. Depending on the project and client, the BA may actually end up wearing several of these other hats themselves, such as project manager or functional consultant. I know that I have from time to time. However, even if you are occasionally given non-BA duties on a project, it's important to remember the core responsibilities of a BA that we are showing here on the screen. A BA will model the business as is and how it will be. They understand the client's business processes as they are today and how they want them to be in the future. Then they put together a plan on how to get there and model the to-be process with the customer. BAs gather and document requirements. They question the who, what, and why of every client ask throughout the project. They clarify with the client on what the specifics of the ask are and provide potential solutions or ideas on solving the problem. BAs develop a requirements work plan. This includes defining the solution scope and quantifying the effort required with the help of a technical consultant. It's also important to communicate with the client when technical limitations are present that might involve a change in business process. BAs manage changing requirements, everyone's favorite. They identify risk when requirements are creeping, changing, or have poor business definition. And finally, they help validate all of these requirements by supporting testing efforts. Next, we have our BA toolkit. And these are just a few of the common applications that help support various BA activities. DevOps, Jira, Excel, or OneNote can be used to track any combination of use cases, requirements, acceptance criteria, and/or test cases. I'm personally a big fan of DevOps for the level of organization that it supports, but I've also been on projects where Excel is the go-to for tracking use cases or OneNote is used for internal collaboration. That being said, a lot of the time it just comes down to client preference or budget. Teams is great for setting and, more importantly, recording meetings. Not every meeting is going to have a scribe, so especially during initial discovery sessions or higher level conversations, recording a meeting can really allow you to focus on engaging in the conversation instead of scrambling to take down notes the whole time. SharePoint is super helpful for storing those meeting recordings or any other documentation that needs to be readily available, either to the internal team or client-facing. And last up, BAs can leverage Visio or one of the many other design tools to better capture processes or system relationships through workflows or use case diagrams. Now that the toolkit is assembled, Melissa is going to talk about the 3 superpowers that every BA should have.
Yeah, thanks, Shelby. When it comes to being the most badass BA, we summed it up into 3 key superpowers that really have a lot of mini superpowers within them. The first one is documenting and communicating risks. Documentation and communication seems like basic concepts that we all do every day, but there are some specific actions you can take to get yourself to superpower status. The first one is manage risk. And not only manage it, but be ahead of it, proactively watching and communicating risk throughout. Number 2, communicate early and often. There is no such thing as over-communication. Number 3, assume nothing. We should never make assumptions, always ask lots of questions, be curious, and validate what you believe you heard, even twice. Shelby will elaborate more on this in a little bit. And lastly, appropriately to key stakeholders, building and maintaining relationships is a key part of this life cycle. It never ends, and throughout, you should always be keeping stakeholders and your project team up to date with any new developments or what's going on in the project, especially escalations. The second superpower is solving problems. A key priority of a BA is helping identify and solve those problems. So the first one is always be thinking holistically, broad and deep. Understand everything that is touched by a problem and overall understanding the full view of the organization and their processes. You can't appropriately tackle one problem without understanding the entire process or having a view of the entire organization and all the all-up problems. Number 2, getting to the root cause of a problem, really drilling in and peeling back the onion on the why, considering a peripheral impact of the problem as well as, is the problem being created by a solution enacted in another place or a systematic process already in place? How many times have you dived into a problem to realize that it is a problem because no one ever changed it, or because people thought they had to do something a certain way, so they did, or at some point, maybe they had to, but haven't needed to for a long time and have just kept up with that same process. Truly, understanding the root cause of a problem and the root reason for requirements is key in solving problems and building that to-be system. Number 3, ask the same questions at least 2 different ways, or maybe even 3. Try to ask it in a different way. Sometimes an answer is directly reflected by the question or the way the question was asked. Stop and think if there's another way you could ask it, or did you truly get the right answer before moving on? Shelby will definitely talk more about this in a little bit as well. And lastly, define acceptance criteria to validate with a proper test. Testing is a key part of requirements. Sometimes you might test and realize that requirements doesn't quite fit the meat of the true need, or testing and validation will bring up other potential requirements not originally considered. The requirement process is a revolving door. A requirement changes throughout the process, which is why it isn't just creating but managing requirements. It is an evolution of a project and system, as well as requirements and test scripts from beginning to end. Test scripts is a whole other process related to requirements, which we don't have near enough time for today. So maybe next conference we'll tackle that one. And then the third superpower is smooth meeting facilitation with clients. Throughout a project, you're going to have a lot of meetings with your project team and stakeholders. Hosting smooth and efficient meetings seems like another item that you might do all the time, but can always be done better and become your superpower. The first one is preparation is the key to being a great BA. Always prepare and then prepare some more. Have agendas, questions sent ahead of time, and make sure you have the right people at the right meetings. This can be tricky on bigger projects and will take a decent amount of time to prepare, execute, and plan next meetings each week, but is a critical part to keeping everyone on the same page and clear on expectations throughout the project. Number 2 is follow POW, which stands for Purpose, Output, and WWIFT, which stands for what is in it for them. So make sure the meeting has a clear purpose, a clear output defined, and the people in the room really know what is in it for them for every single meeting you facilitate. And number 3, reiterate goals of the meeting. They should be outlined in your agenda or referenced. There should be clear next steps at the end. You should always over-communicate before the meeting, during, and wrap up the meeting with clear expectations of what is happening next for every single meeting. I'm sure the project managers in the room will give a thumbs up to these superpowers. All right, so let's take those superpowers and reference them in some real life scenarios. So we have a couple of different buckets here. We have our villain. So this is a scenario that is not so good. We have our sidekick, which is better. And then we have badass, which is where we all strive to be. So let's take a look at these. So the first example is on communication risk, one of the superpowers that we just covered. And we have our villain. They addressed it by thinking they have identified the risk, but aren't sure, so they will wait and see what happens. Probably not the most ideal response. Our sidekick identified a risk and sent an email to the PM about it. That's definitely better, but still could use improvement. Our badass communicated to the PM about identified risk, alerted the project team, provided a suggestion to eliminate the risk, and followed up. Now that's a response the whole team would feel good about. So let's go on to the next one, problem solver. Our villain did not realize there was a problem and just wrote down what the stakeholder said. Our sidekick realized there was a problem, but was unsure of how to solve it. And our badass realized there was a problem, documented it, provided at least one possible solution, and invited project stakeholders to weigh in. So I imagine we are seeing a trend here. And lastly, we have a meeting facilitation example. Our villain primarily listens to the discussion and does not ask questions. Our sidekick participates in the discussion, asks pointed questions based on what is being said, which is pretty good, but our badass actively leads the discussion and asks questions, ensuring full understanding. So as you can see, the clear difference between our villain, sidekick, and badass is taking each scenario a step further and really ensuring that communication, there's a clear expectation setting, full ownership, and inclusion of all the necessary folks. A villain can easily become a badass by following these 3 superpowers and working towards that superpower status. All right, back over to you, Shelby.
All right. So now that we know what superpowers the BA should possess, let's talk about how we can use those superpowers to do what is really at the core of a BA role, which is creating badass requirements. As you may have seen this cartoon on the screen before, there are many variations of it out on the interwebs, but we included it because it does a really great job at showcasing what can and often does happen in a project when a BA isn't involved and requirements are not properly drawn out. Oftentimes, business and IT struggle to communicate effectively, and it makes sense because they essentially speak 2 different languages. Like we've mentioned before, a BA acts as that magical link between business and IT. A BA can help a client avoid this scenario here by eliciting and developing clear, accurate requirements that are understood and shared by all parties involved. So let's take a closer look at what goes into a requirement. First, we need to understand what is at the core of a requirement. Requirements center on 3 main pillars: people, process, and technology. These 3 categories should form the basis for all of your requirements. So let's start with people. Who are the people doing the work, and who are all of the people that they collaborate with to get their work done? When you start to dive deeper into the people aspect, remember to consider the level of security and access for all of these different people involved. Next, we have process. What is it that they do today, and what is it that they want to do? What is the goal of each process? What are they hoping to get out of it? And then we have technology. What are all of the tools that they use to get their job done? What are the different systems, and do they talk to each other? How does the technology support what they do? And more importantly, how does it not support what they do? What are their pain points? Once we understand these core concepts, we can start to define what makes a truly good requirement. Here we have the 8 characteristics that make up a good requirement. Think of these characteristics as a series of filters. A good requirement will pass all 8 filters. A requirement should be verifiable, clear and concise, complete, consistent, traceable, viable, necessary, and implementation free. Next, Melissa is going to walk you through each of these in a little bit more detail and with some examples.
All right. So first up is verifiable. So verifiable requirement should be stated in such a way that it can be tested by inspection, analysis, and demonstration. This ensures that you can evaluate whether the system has in fact met that requirement. So let's take a look at a couple of examples, and we'll do this for each one. A bad example would be the system must be user-friendly. What is the definition of user-friendly anyways, one might wonder. Hear that lots of times. A good example would be, as any system user, I need my interface to be menu-driven and provide dialog boxes, help screens, radio buttons, and drop-down list boxes to help me do user inputs so that I can easily navigate the screen, which is a lot more specific than the bad example. The second one is clear and concise. A clear and concise requirement must consist of a single requirement, must be easily read and understood by non-technical people, must be unambiguous and therefore not susceptible to multiple interpretations, must avoid subjective or open-ended terms. So a bad example would be, all screens must appear on the monitor quickly. I'm sure we've all heard this one before. And a good example would be, as a sales user, I must have the opportunity report load within 2 seconds, which I would say good luck on that one. That's usually pretty difficult. The third one is complete. A complete requirement contains all the information that is needed to define the system function. It leaves no one guessing and includes measurement units. So a bad example of this one would be must have offline capabilities, where a good example and a more detailed example would be, as a mobile technician, I need a tool that can allow me to access all work order functions when I'm not able to access cellular service so that I can service our remote customers. All right, the fourth one is consistent. A consistent requirement does not conflict with other requirements, uses the same terminology throughout the specification, does not duplicate other requirements or pieces of requirements, or create redundancy in any way. A bad example of this one is 2 different requirements. So requirement 1, opportunities should have estimated revenue, and requirement 2, estimated revenue has to be reported on. So this one's inconsistent because you're saying you need to report on something that is not noted as required for input. Where a good example of this one would be, as a salesperson, I should have the ability to capture estimated revenue related to any given opportunity so that I can measure my pipeline with reporting. So a lot more consistent. The fifth one is traceable. A traceable requirement has a unique identity or number, cannot be separated or broken down into smaller requirements, can be easily traced through to specification, design, and testing. And a bad example of this one would be, they need a lost opportunity report filtered by region and a lost opportunity report broken out by salesperson. A good example of this would be actually breaking it into 3 requirements. So the first one would be, as a sales manager, I need to have a report that shows me lost opportunities by region so that I can measure all losses. Requirement 2 would be, as a salesperson, I need to see my lost opportunities by quarter. And the third requirement would be, as a sales manager, I need to have a report that shows me lost opportunities by salesperson so that I can measure all losses. The sixth one is viable. A viable requirement can be met using existing or planned technology, can be achieved within the budget and schedule, will be used by the end users, and is helpful to build out the system. So a bad example of this one would be, the new system should be installed with no disruption to customer service. A good example of this one would be, as a customer service rep, I should not experience more than 4 hours of downtime, so we're being more specific about that, on installation of the new case functionality so that I can easily pick up my in-flight cases where I left off. And then the seventh one is necessary. A necessary requirement is one that must be present to meet system objectives, is absolutely critical for the operation of the system or process, and it leads to a deficiency in the system or process if it is removed. So a bad example of this one would be users should be able to log into the system, which is pretty generic. A good example would be, as a sales manager, I need to have a security role that will allow me to access the sales leadership model-driven app so that I can view all of the processes and functionality required by my role. And the last one is implementation free. A requirement is implementation free when it is defined what functions are provided by the system, does not specify how a function can or should be implemented, and in turn allows the system developer to decide what technology or method is best suited to achieve the function. And I'm sure all of us have seen this before too. So the bad example is after clicking a button in the command bar, JavaScript should run and kick off a notification to the user with a message saying operation successful. A good example would be, as a salesperson, when I am ready to generate my order connection to F&O, I should be able to take an action and get a notification or signal so that I know my operation was successful. So again, not talking about the technology, just talking about the need of the action. So this looks easy, right? So with these requirements, filters in mind, Shelby's going to talk through some helpful tips to ensure you are creating requirements that can check all of these boxes.
Great. And we'll start with my personal favorite, ask stupid questions. Or put another way, be curious. A huge part of being a badass BA is asking the right questions to get the information you need. And sometimes that is going to feel like you're asking a stupid question. So start with what you already know. Assuming you do some prior research or clarify at least part of the answer on your own, you should now have a vague idea of the specific information you're looking for. Even if you take a guess and it doesn't turn out to be entirely correct, you'll still sound more prepared than if you started with a blank stare. When you lay the groundwork for a question with even a little prior knowledge, you'll make it easier for the customer to explain to you exactly what you need to know while avoiding the extraneous details that aren't truly necessary. Next, make a solid suggestion. Sometimes questions can sound stupid simply because they're too broad. For example, what do you do in your sales department? Which can make it seem like you didn't give it a second thought before you asked. So instead, take the approach of saying, I understand this. Can you tell me more about that process? Next, ask with confidence. Don't apologize for asking a question. The key to asking stupid questions is to avoid acknowledging that you think they're stupid. When you phrase your question with the assumption that you should already know the answer, for example, I know this is such a stupid question, but how do you upload the document? You sound a lot less knowledgeable than if you would have just asked the question in a more straightforward manner, like, can you walk me through the process of uploading the document? It helps to remember that in general, people love talking about what they do and won't hesitate to help when you ask a simple question, even if it seems embarrassingly obvious to you. The caveat being, unless you keep asking the same question over and over, or if it's something that you could have easily figured out by doing some quick research. Next, pretend like you're a new employee, because you basically are. By the time you get to detailed requirements gathering, you've probably already done a lot of research on the organization. You know details about the industry and the basic types of work that they perform, but just like if you were a new employee, you truly have no idea about the nuances of their business. So don't be afraid to venture into the unknown. You might be surprised, or maybe not, at how often clients are unaware of how something in their own business works, or what happens outside of their daily routine. So it can be a learning experience for you both. And finally, don't ask yes/no questions. The greatest dead end to getting more information is a question that can be answered in one word. Instead, try leading with, tell me more about. How do you? Why do you? When do you? If you are starting a question with do you, take a pause and start the question again from a different angle. The next helpful tip is form your squad and follow up. So odds are you're going to be spending a lot of time with this subset of people, so it's important to build relationships. Try using we early on in conversations to facilitate those team vibes. Empathize and put yourself in their shoes as you're talking through the different processes. Let them know their concerns and pain points are being heard and understood. And try to remind them of what they're doing well, not just what could be better all the time. Next, build the requirements collaboratively. Make sure you have the proper mix of people, your subject matter experts, end users, product owners, even your dev resource or solution architect for oversight. At some point, each of these groups should be involved in the conversation, especially end users who are the ones that will actually be doing the work. They're critical to help determine what output is needed, how the information is going to be used, who consumes it, and how they consume it. And finally, hold regular review meetings between business and IT. Whether you use joint design sessions, sprints, daily stand-ups, what have you. Use these meetings to hold team members accountable by assigning tasks and asking for status updates. Next, be patient but firm. I know it's hard, but don't get frustrated if requirements change or are further refined as you learn more. Requirements gathering is an iterative process, and it's unavoidable that they're going to change sometimes. However, with that being said, at a certain point, the requirements do have to be locked down if they're going to be included in the build for a release or go live. And that's why it's really important to make sure you obtain some sort of sign off or approval for the requirements you've created once you get to that point. The next tip is focus, listen, document. So first, try to resist solutioning during requirements gathering. As you're working through requirements gathering, it can be tempting to start solutioning, even if just in your mind during the meeting. Try to stay present by asking a question, listening to understand, and then repeating it back in your own words to either confirm that both parties are on the same page or if the math still isn't mathing. Next, keep requirements documentation organized and available, including during requirement sessions. Especially because so many of us are remote these days, it can be really helpful to have DevOps or Excel pulled up on the screen during the meeting so the client can see what is being defined. With the customer watching, they can correct or clarify what is being written in real time. On top of encouraging engagement, this helps to ensure that when it comes time for them to review and approve, there shouldn't be any surprises. And finally, flex your creative skills. Visualize by using flowcharts or use case diagrams when it's valuable. Not every requirement is going to benefit from a visualization, but there are scenarios where it makes sense. Many clients respond well to visual representation or even prefer it. It can help clarify the process and identify gaps, especially in complex scenarios. And last but not least, don't forget to check yourself on a regular basis. Do the requirements make sense? Could anyone reading this understand it? Does it pass all the filters of a good requirement? Have you collaborated on this requirement with the client? Does this need a visual to paint a better picture? Is this requirement thinking about the future state? And are the requirements well organized and visible to the client? If you remember to continually go back to these questions throughout a project and fine-tune your superpowers, you're guaranteed to produce awesome requirements and become a certified badass BA. That wraps up what we had to share today. So now let's get to some questions.
Hey everyone. Hey Shelby.
Hey.
Thanks for joining our session today. So we're here to answer any questions. Again, I'm Melissa Erickson. I'm here with Shelby Spillar. And we have one good question from Ben, but I'd love to hear questions from the rest of the group. So put them in the chat so we can go ahead and answer them for you. So Shelby, what do you think about Ben's question around 19 people, fire hose of information, and how to effectively gather those requirements and really kind of consolidate them?
Right. I mean, well, that's crazy. But so my first instinct would be, is there any way to break down that group into smaller groups, or I don't know if you're meeting with them one-on-one. But either way, I would try to break down that information in some way, and make sure your notes are organized. I would, if you can record the sessions, I would record them so that you can go back to them and re-listen to any details and see how they line up against each other. And then I mean, personally, I would sit with the information, I would review it, make sure I understand it really well, distill it into kind of a summary, high level key points, and then review that back with the bigger group to make sure everyone's on the same page. But that's my first instinct on how I would approach that. But curious what your approach is, how you're handling that.
Yeah, I was thinking about a couple of the last slides that you had with the tips, and a couple of things that kind of I gleamed out of that. I think, Ben, that you're probably doing, but I think could be related are the being firm and obtaining approval. So probably one of the hard parts with a big group like that is getting people to agree on things or really define, yes, this is what we're going to move forward with. So those were kind of two that I thought about as I was thinking about this question is, you probably have to be really firm with the group, especially that big of a group, which is hard, very hard, and really push them to make decisions, right? And define and decide on that final process. And then also too, Shelby, I thought, we had check yourself, but you could also have check the client, right? Or your team or whoever it is that you're working with. So, same things apply to them. Are they making sure they've got the right people? Are they sure it needs to be that many people? Are they really clear on the goals? So I think you could also apply the check yourself to whoever you're working with as well.
Right. And another one that, now you said that, I'm not sure what the process is, obviously, but with that many people involved, a visual might really be effective there, mapping it out easily for a large group to understand and give feedback on.
Yeah, awesome. All right, I see we have some things in the chat, so let's see if we have any other questions we can talk about. I'm writing up a scope hell right now with pages of written. I like that you said hell too, because you got to stick with the theme, and throw in some swear words where we can. But write up now with pages of written notes and rows of nonsensical notes I took in XLS to get through. You've given me some really great tips and ideas to help make sense of it. Yes. I always think it's so interesting because we talk about preparing, planning, right? But I think those are things that seem somewhat obvious, right? But then also at the same time, we don't think about, right? Like, okay, after I get through the session, now how am I going to take all that information and put it into something that makes sense, right? Or then I can take action on later.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right. How do the responsibilities of a BA differ from that of a product owner? Any thoughts on that, Shelby?
Yeah. So I'm actually in a situation right now where I'm working as the BA and I do have a product owner on the team. And they work at a higher level, I would say. They do participate in requirements gathering. And they do help out with that, but we may be reaching out to end users more than them. Like, they're not involved in every conversation. We may be having more conversations, more detailed conversations, doing the work to kind of map it out. And then we would bring that back to them and kind of get their approval, get their higher level input on it. But I would say they work almost like a level above a BA, whereas a BA is kind of more down in the details, getting the nitty gritty, where a product owner then kind of gives their input, approval, and say on that information, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good description of it. Another question we got is, how would you handle a negative room during a requirements gathering session? Any experience with that? Never. I'm sure we've never had a negative room, right?
Right. I mean, yes. I mean, that's never a good situation. Luckily, I haven't run into that a whole lot. I think in those situations, just being prepared really helps. Like, if, even if you get stuck, you can say, okay, let's just move on to the next one. Let's try to get through the agenda. But yeah, Melissa, do you have any
Yeah, I mean, my thought was just like try to lighten the mood. I mean, I tell people this all the time. What we do is important and what we do is serious, but it's not that serious, right? So, whatever it could be impacting that negativity, whether it's just that team dynamic or people are not happy about the project or whatever it might be. I think anyways, you can try to lighten the mood, make it not so serious, make it a little bit more fun. Like, hey, we're doing this because ultimately we have this goal, or the success criteria that we want to achieve. And, always kind of lean back into the why, I think is probably helpful. But either way, I mean, people are people. So it's hard to adjust, people's mentality.
And part of that, I mean, so one of the tips we had at the end is, empathizing with them. Like, why is it negative? Like, maybe just kind of lean into that. Like, yeah, I understand this sucks. Like, this isn't a good process right now. Or, whatever is kind of bringing it down, just like let them know you understand, but like you're on a team together and you're trying to, work together to reach this goal. And
and I think we can do that, right, as the BAs, because we're really there to help and facilitate. And I think we can be kind of that outside source that goes, hey, I understand where you're coming from. Like, you don't want to do this, but like, let's just make the best of it, right? Because we, at the same time, we're not in the position where we're driving that specific thing. And so I think we can kind of be that source of like, hey, we understand where you're coming from.
I'm just the messenger. Like,
exactly. We're just here to help.
Yeah.
All right. Another question we have is, as a developer, how can we help support our BA in the process? Initial thoughts on that, Shelby?
Yep. So I work really closely with our developers. So they, we talk on a daily basis. They join, for me, they join our daily stand-up. So, and our kind of backlog refinements and requirements gathering that we do. So I actually work really close to them. They're there to help give almost equal input on what is possible when we're, defining the requirements a little bit, like how can we work through this? So just being open to the conversation, open to joining meetings that your BA might need you to join. I think the dev resource and a BA work extremely closely together.
Yeah.
In my experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And ideally, I think they would. So that could always be an improvement too. If that's not the case, how can you build a better relationship to work closer together? All right. One more question I think we have here. What sort of education would you recommend for someone interested in getting into being a BA? Any initial areas you've referred to?
That's a good question. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but we have a lot of internal resources at my company. So that was a great starting point for me, and learning from other BAs. That's really where I got my initial education from it, other than being a consultant. I mean, I feel like a lot of it comes really naturally going from consultant to BA. They're very intertwined. So, so I didn't go through necessarily any formal education for my BA role, but I don't know, Melissa, if you're aware of any other avenues for that.
Yeah, I think it's more natural for some people, right, than for others. So Shelby is a natural. It just kind of comes easy for her. But I think for some other people, it is a little bit harder, right? And you have to be more thoughtful about it. So, I mean, obviously, searching on the web to find any information you can is great. Obviously, and I know somebody mentioned this, you can also use the IIBA site, which is another good resource for BA materials as well. So definitely, I'd say check that out, do some searching, see what you find. But I think this is an area where there's not always a lot of great information. Like even when, like Shelby said, we came up with this material, we've worked pretty purposefully in-house to come up with a lot of this material. And so we had it. But if we were to just start this from scratch and be looking for, additional tools or helpful items, I think it would have been kind of hard to really find a lot of information on this topic. I don't think there's a lot out there. So I guess maybe that's an area somebody could start blogging or, helping fill more resources in this area. I think that's definitely a need.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Somebody else said IIBA. I think that's the best place today that you could go to look at additional resources. All right. Do we get any other questions? Looks like maybe one more. How do you see the dynamic of a business consultant who is working the project with the customer compared to the BA role? What areas do you see the two shared responsibilities during a project? This is an interesting one, Shelby. What's your take on a consultant versus the BA?
Right. So it obviously depends on like the setup, like, you know, how you're working with it, if it's a outside consultant or, you know, how it's being handled. But I feel like consultants are generally focused on one project, and they might be implementing some functionality. Whereas I think of a BA as they have more of an overarching understanding of the company. Like they don't just know what's going on with this one project. They need to know how it interacts with everything else. And to an extent, a consultant does need to know that, but I feel like the BA knows more about that. And in general, I don't, at least in my experience, a BA isn't implementing as much of the functionality as a consultant might. When I'm on a consultant project, I'm doing the functional work. Where I'm a BA, it's really more focused on the requirements piece and not the actual functionality and putting it in place.
Yeah. I think a lot of times too, like the BA will focus on working with the people, right, to really determine what those requirements are and, you know, what the use case is and what the testing scenarios will be. And so you really do all that upfront detailed work. And then I think the consultants really group those requirements together and then work on a build, right? So they'll say, okay, now we're going to take all, you know, these 5 requirements and now we're going to go build them to meet these requirements, right? So I think a lot of times too, the BA is also doing the more upfront work, where then the consultant is really just focused on the build. A lot of us know, you know, sometimes we have to do both roles, right? We don't have the luxury of having an additional BA. A lot of times we're just a consultant on a project and we have to play the BA and play the consultant. And so those intertwine where you're working on the requirements with them while also kind of doing the build. But ideally, right, you could have it really be structured. You'd have, you know, separate people in those roles to make sure you're really defining the requirements the way they should be and, you know, really meeting the objectives of the company. But we know it doesn't always work like that, right?
Yeah, I wish.
So I think I think they're similar roles, right? But if you have both of them, probably that line is the difference between the like defining and working with the person on the requirements to the build. A BA is generally not doing any of the build work, right? In theory, a BA doesn't even necessarily have to have knowledge of the platform, right? Or the system that you're gathering requirements for. They can be agnostic in that regard.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Good call out, for sure.
Awesome. All right. Did I miss any other questions that came through? All right. Another good site is Modern Analyst. There you go. A couple of resources to use. All right. I think we have 2 minutes left, maybe a little less than 2 minutes. So overall, Shelby, any final tips on kind of helping organizations to see the value in spending time on doing those requirements up front?
Show them your stats from the beginning of this deck.
Yes, good reference.
I mean, yeah, it can be hard to show the value of a BA, but once you realize it, I don't think you can imagine functioning without one. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Melissa?
Yeah, I agree. It's so hard because people think, oh, we got to spend all this time and we want to get going and oh, that's going to cost us extra money. But in the spectrum of things, it will cost less money and time overall, right? If you really do that upfront process well. So I think you just have to keep pushing it, right? This is why it's important. This is what we're trying to prevent. And hey, if you can make it happen, great. But sometimes you won't and you'll just have to get a project done. So. Yep. All right. Looks like we are at our final time. So thanks so much for joining the session with us today. Thanks, Shelby, for doing your first Dynamics Con session with me.
Thanks
we had a blast.
Yeah,
thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.